Hello, I'm Anne and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up the books that I read in October of 2021, which means we only have 2 more months left of 2021, which is crazy to think about. This month was a pretty good reading month for me. I was surprised how many books I gave 4 stars, and for me, the average book rating I give is 3 stars, and usually the majority of ratings I give per month are around 3 stars. So I was really happy with enjoying the majority of books I read. Also, quite a few of these I did separate book video or reviews for, so I will link below in the description the ones that I don't really want to talk about that much on this video because I've already talked about them extensively. As always, I'm going to be going from the lowest rated to the highest rated, and at the end of this video I'm going to be doing my TBR for November. The first book I read this month is The Blood Countess by Lana Popovic. I read this because I was really intrigued by the premise. Basically, it tells a fictionalized version of Elizabeth Bathory. So there's a lot of legends and rumors around her that she would sacrifice her maids, cut them open, and bathe in their blood so that she could remain young. She is considered one of the first vampires. There's a lot of legends and rumors around her. She was a wealthy Hungarian noblewoman in the 16th or 17th century. And this book seeks to tell a fictionalized version of her life, but from the perspective of this maid who comes to live with her. And I love that premise. I was like, I'm totally here. It's half history, myth, but also fantasy. I ended up giving this book 1.25 stars, which is incredibly low for me. Here's the problem. I don't think this book knew what it wanted to do. On one hand, you have Anna, the main character. She comes to the castle, and she's not quite sure what to make of Elizabeth Bathory. Is she this villain? The book really plays up the idea of all men are bad, and that Elizabeth is twisted because her husband is so abusive. And I was like, okay, that's one argument to make. I don't think it's made well in this book, but it is one argument to be made. However, then the last quarter of the book focuses completely on Elizabeth being completely evil. And nothing justifies how evil she is. It's like saying that a child is abused and then goes on to become a serial killer. Yes, it's horrible that that child is abused. Anyone who abuses a child should die, in my opinion. Probably controversial. But that does not mean that you can then say, oh yeah, no, it's totally fine that they went out and killed 20 people. That's totally fine. No, it's really not. It's really not. So I feel like this book was trying to make 2 arguments at once and it didn't make sense. Also, Anna. Anna is a complete idiot throughout the entire book. I would have had no problem if the ending had ended with Elizabeth killing her and winning. I would have been yes, you go girl, Elizabeth, finally you did something good. Because Anna is an idiot. She gets so many people punished by Elizabeth just for her own benefit. She's constantly thinking of herself, but then she's always saying, no, I'm trying to send money back to my family, and so that's my excuse for being an absolute horrible human being to pretty much everyone. But then she's also two-faced, and she'll turn around and be super nice to them in the next scene, and you're like, I know, but that does not make up for how horrible you were for them. Anyway, I could rant a lot about this book. I won't. Let's just say that it was an interesting premise, but I really, really disliked how it developed. So the next story is the only one I put on my list of books to read because it was an actual book, but I did it for my video last week, and that is Snow, Glass, and Apples by Neil Gaiman. Let me do a disclaimer because I didn't realize this in my last video, but I realized it after somebody commented on my video saying, yeah, Blood, Glass, Apples was originally a short story and they just adapted it into a comic. So me ranting about how it shouldn't be on the list of disturbing short stories because it wasn't a short story, just ignore that because it is a short story. Just I read the wrong thing. But I did read 19 short stories. I just feel weird putting short stories on my read list. Maybe I'll go back and add them, but you can go back to that video. I will link it in the description if you're curious to see all the like disturbing Halloween short story reads that I read this month. But this one is just an example of one of the 19 that I read, and it turned out to be wrong because it wasn't even a short story. It was a comic and I read the wrong thing. But I have my full thoughts about this book and all the other short stories I read in my previous video. Now we're getting to already 3-star reads. So the next book is Hour of the Witch by Chris Bojalian. This book is based around the idea of the Salem witch trials in the 17th century, where there was almost this hysteria around this idea that demons and the devil would take over people who were different and turn them into witches and possess them and make them do evil deeds. And it was a very Puritan culture at that time, so it kind of ran rampant. There was similar cases that was happening in Europe, so it wasn't just focused on Massachusetts or the colonies. This book follows Mary, who is married to this very abusive man. And after he literally sticks a fork into her hand, she decides to seek a divorce from him through legal proceedings. I don't want to give spoilers to the second half of the book, but the stuff going on about a witch possibly being in town. Mary finds a few suspicious items buried in her front yard, but of course her maid sees that and assumes she is the one that buries them. So there's rumors going around the village that Mary is a witch. So she's not only dealing with this horrible abuse from her husband, but also this hysteria around people that are different, people who speak out against more traditional ideas. And I really enjoyed this book. However, it feels very slow. Like there wasn't that much that happened outside of a few plot twists. There's a great plot twist at the end of who the witch is. Besides that, there's not that much going on. I did enjoy that Mary feels very much part of her time. One of my main criticisms about historical characters, especially female historical characters, is a lot of modern authors portray them as feeling much more modern, and Mary did not. She's a very independent woman and very intelligent, but she's also very much a product of her time. So I enjoyed seeing that aspect. I also enjoyed learning where the book would twist and turn, because I never knew where it was going next. I had a lot of predictions that turned out to be true, but I didn't know for sure, and I enjoyed that. But just in general, I feel like this book could have been 100 less pages and not lost anything. So it was a good book, but it wasn't a great book. The next book is Some Choose Darkness by Charlie Donlia. So this book follows this young attorney, forensic investigator, that her father, who was a very established attorney lawyer, he dies. And so she has to go through all his previous cases that he was working on and kind of close things up, transfer them to other lawyers, finish the cases herself, things like that. One of the cases is about this man who was a serial killer, I believe 20 to 30 years before. He wasn't caught for any of his actual victims except for his wife, who he murdered. And that's what he was tried and convicted for, and he has been in prison all these years, and now he is finally getting out. So she starts investigating. There's a lot of puzzle pieces that Rory isn't sure why her father was so intent on this case. What is the background? Is Angela really dead? Did her husband kill her? Or possibly is she still alive? It's a really good, hard-hitting mystery. So one of my main criticisms for this book is that it starts off with three main perspectives. You have Rory, you have Angela, and you have the thief, the serial killer. And so I loved jumping back and forth from their perspectives, but about, I would say, halfway through the book, both the thief and Angela's perspectives drop out and are replaced with Rory's father's perspective and another woman's perspective. And I really didn't like the story as much when they came in. I wasn't as interested in what was happening. I thought it was much more predictable. So that's why I decided on giving it 3.5 stars, a little bit in the middle. So the next 4 books I read this month were all Goosebumps. I did a video near the beginning of this month where I just read a bunch of Goosebumps from my childhood and reviewed them, and all of these I gave 4 stars because I just really enjoyed them. And they're not super deep, but they're super light and fun to read. I read Welcome to Camp Nightmare by R.L. Stine, Welcome to Dead House, Stay Out of the Basement, The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. So those were the 4 that I read. The next book I read is The Castle in Transylvania by Jules Verne, which I prefer its original title, The Castle of the Carpathians. I did an entire book review for this book if you're curious to hear my full thoughts about it. Jules Verne, who is usually associated with sci-fi, writing like a gothic horror, really intriguing. I enjoyed the book and I gave it 4 stars, but I will leave the link to my original review down in the description. The next one I read is Kokoro by Natsume Soseki. So Natsume was this writer who wrote during the end of the Meiji period, beginning of the Taisho era in Japan. So you're looking at like 1900 to like 1920s. He wrote a lot about the changing times in Japan, this modernization. And Kokoro is this story that follows this young man who is a college student and his friendship with an older man. And it's interesting because the main story is set in 1912, which is the same year of the death of the Meiji Emperor. In fact, it deals with his death in this book. And that was kind of a turning point to the history of Japan where things started to get very modern quickly. You also had this separation between the country people and the city people because the city was getting very modern, but the country was still staying kind of traditional. So you have a lot of that conflicts as well as like the older generation having much more wider divide than with the younger generation than it did in the past. The book is told in 3 parts. The first one is just understanding the friendship between this older man and this younger college student. Nothing like weird, okay? It's just friendship. And the second part is the young man returns home to his family farm and understands like the difference between the country and the city. And then the third part is Sensei, the older man's story, like his upbringing all the way up to some things that he was hiding from the young man. So really, really interesting story when it comes to studying the history of the era. However, I kind of disliked how the 3 parts were a bit disjointed. They didn't really build on each other well. And especially since we never see the young man's reaction to Sensei's story. I gave this 4 stars, but I would have liked if the 3 parts had flown better together. Especially since this is considered Natsume Soseki's like magnum opus, his best work. I should have actually been like holding this up the entire time because I have an actual copy of it. I'm not the brightest bulb in the bunch. Okay, so the final 2 books I read were the ones that I pulled out of my books I read container to force myself to read things on my bookshelf. And the first one is The Pharaohs of Ancient Egypt by Elizabeth Payne. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.25 stars. On one hand, yes, it does focus on like certain of the very famous pharaohs, but it also gives an overall like idea of not only how in the modern day we discovered ancient Egypt and like the finding of the Rosetta Stone, but also like showing from the height of ancient Egypt all the way down to kind of its fall later on. It was really interesting to read it. There are also quite a few pictures of, like, this is something that when I was like in middle grade, I would have loved this book. So I really enjoyed it. I was surprised how much I enjoyed it because for me, kids' books about like history are really great, but then sometimes they're really bad, especially if the author has an agenda of like a point they're pushing. But this one did a really good job. I really enjoyed it. So now we're getting to the final book I read this month, which is Unbroken by Laura Hildebrand. This book follows an Olympic athlete. He was a runner who becomes a soldier and ends up being imprisoned, caught by the Japanese and surviving in a POW camp until the end of the war. And like, on one hand, reading this story, I was like, this guy is so unlucky, but on the other hand, he is incredibly lucky because his plane goes down in the middle of the ocean and he and only like 2 other crew members survive. And then he has to survive for over a month on this raft with like no food, no water. And then what happens? He's picked up by the Japanese, who are incredibly harsh and horrible in treating POWs. Like, because as part of the Japanese culture, they believed it was shameful to surrender. So when soldiers would surrender to the Japanese, oftentimes they would either kill them or constantly punish them because they were like, you're a coward. So you see a lot of the cultural aspects conflicting between America and Japan. But I absolutely loved this book. The first part follows Louis Zamperini, the Olympic runner, his early life, and then we follow how he got into running and then his competition in the Olympics, and then we get to his experiences in the war, and then it follows to his POW. I think about, I would say the second half of the book is all about his POW experiences until the ending, and then he returns to the US and has to deal with struggles and issues. He gets into drinking, and it's a brutal book, but it was incredibly beautiful. I gave this 5 stars, and I don't give many books 5 stars, so it was an exceptional book. Now we have to get to the books that I am reading next month. I do have a couple books I'm currently in the middle of that I need to finish. And then I have a couple for my book club I need to read, and then a couple from here that I need to draw out. So, first of all, the ones that I'm either currently reading or going to be reading soon. There's a couple on my phone I have. Speaking of which, I got a new phone. My old one broke, so I got a new one. And it's great having a new one. Anyway, the first one I'm currently reading, and I'm about halfway done, is The Truth of the Divine by Lindsay Ellis. This is the sequel to Axiom's End. I really enjoyed the first book. I think I gave it 4 stars. This one is good. I'm enjoying aspects of it, but it does feel so much more like a soap opera, which is strange to call like a sci-fi book a soap opera. But basically it follows this young woman who gets connected with this alien, and there's all these ramifications for like our society, humanity getting involved with the aliens. So I'm currently halfway done with it. I'm not enjoying it half as much as the first one, but it's okay. There's aspects of it I'm enjoying. I just don't love it as much as the first one. The next one I'm reading is Village School by Miss Reed, and Gina Stanier always recommends this on her YouTube channel, and I am in the mood for like cozy reads. I'm currently about a third of the way done with that. I'm taking my time because I only read it for like 15 minutes or so every single morning. It's a short book, but it's nice to like get into the cozy mood and relax in the morning before I have to like run off to school. The last one I got is one that I was hoping to get for Halloween, but that didn't happen. That's The Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. I've not read any of Jay Kristoff's books. I don't know anything about it, but I read the plot of this one, and this is a new book that came out in September of this year, I believe. And I was really intrigued by the idea of like vampire combined with like a high fantasy world with power struggles and things like that. This is a 700-page book, and so this is probably going to be the only audiobook I read this month. I'm so used to vampire novels being this like weird over-sexualized kind of gothic romance urban fantasy. I just don't like how a lot of vampire novels stick into a very select genre. So I saw this one and I was like, ooh. Again, it feels like a little late to read this because it's not Halloween anymore, but you know, I can read it any time of the year. All right, so the next 2 books I am reading are for my book club, and I know nothing about these, which is nice. So the first one is Mirror Mirror by Cara Delevingne. I've enjoyed Cara as an actress before, but I know nothing about like this book. And then the second one is Monstrous Devices by Damien Love. Again, know nothing about this book, but it's fantasy steampunk, I believe. So those are the two that I have to read for my book club. So now we're getting to the books I have to pull out of here. Oh, I gotta show it. I realized when I was editing my last video that like I was down here and you guys just could hear just that, and that was it. But all right. Oh, okay. Modern Martyr. This is going to be a challenge to read. But this is the book that is about this Catholic missionary to Vietnam who was then killed. I guess it's not that long a book. It's only like 200 some pages. And it is quite an old book. But I don't know anything about it besides that. So, yeah. It's definitely going to take me like the entire month to read because I'm not going to like feel super into reading it. That's fine. That's fine. Let's just hope I don't get another like super dense one like that. That was in my... Oh no. Sources of Chinese Tradition. Do you see how big that book is? Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's only like 800 pages. Okay. I'll try to get this done this month, but I really doubt I'll be able to. So what we're going to probably do is I'm going to get this done as much as possible, but then I'm going to pick out another book on my bookshelf to read that's a little bit easier, and then I'll like move this over into next month, whatever I don't get done out of it, because there's no way I'll be able to, like with school, finish an 800-page like history book. No way. So, all right, those are the books I'm going to read in November. Wish me luck. Have you read any of these books, whether the ones that I have on my TBR or the ones that I read in October? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, like, comment, subscribe. I post every Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and I will see you all next week. Have a good week. Bye.